Are you curious what life is really like for a pilot in the Great White North? Well, let me tell you all about it. Welcome back to Aviator Inspirations. So nice to have you back, ready to consume some aviation content. On this channel, I take the mystery out of the aviation industry. So if you're new here, consider subscribing so you don't miss any of my future videos. On this episode, I'm going to share with you my experience flying in the Canadian Arctic. I spent nearly 2 years flying around Baffin Island and Nunavut, and it was quite the adventure. I'm going to talk about the seasons, some challenging flying conditions, and share with you some incredible stories. So let's start with the seasons. And as you might expect, the Arctic is cold. Winter lasts 9 months, and you have a short, cool summer of only 3 months. Average temperatures in January are around minus 34 degrees Celsius, but they can drop to as low as minus 50. And the warmest temperatures in July average around plus 10, but some regions do get into the plus 20s. Personally, the coldest temperature I felt was minus 60 degrees Celsius with the wind chill. Still makes me feel cold thinking about it. That winter I went to Hawaii on vacation and it was plus 30 degrees. When I came back to work it was at minus 30 degrees, a 60-degree difference. That's crazy. Different areas of Baffin Island receive different amounts of snowfall, depending on the moisture content. But overall the Arctic is fairly dry, and snowfall on Baffin Island can vary between 50 inches a year all the way up to 200 inches a year. The Arctic is also very windy. Because it lies on the Canadian Shield, which is made up of rock, there are very few trees that grow, and any that do grow are very short, so there's not much to slow down the wind. Because of that, with the wind chill it feels much colder. The summers, although short, are quite beautiful. The oceans open up for only a few months, but during that transition period, the colors are phenomenal. They start to turn from white to aqua as the snow starts to melt and the ice becomes transparent to when the breakup happens and it turns to a deep blue. After several weeks, you start to witness the breakup. And for the first time, you actually can tell the difference between land and water. When I first started flying in the Arctic, it was around springtime, so I actually had no idea what was land and what was water. So for me, that first summer was actually quite amazing, because what I thought was water was actually land, and I could see clearly the borders of where the ocean met the land. Eventually, all the ice is gone and the ocean turns to a deep blue. Occasionally, you even see icebergs floating by, which on its own is super cool to see, and some are as big as football fields. Halfway through summer, you see these beautiful little flowers pop up here and there, giving a little color to the boring brown landscape. But my favorite part of summer was seeing all the glaciers. Again, in the winter you have no idea where they are because everything is covered in snow. But there's so many of them and they cover such large areas. It really makes you appreciate the experience, because with global warming they are shrinking at such a fast pace that they could be gone in our lifetime. Another thing that's psychologically challenging is how many hours the sun is out in a day. On the shoulder seasons you have more or less normal sunrise and sunsets. But during the January months, when the sun does not come out at all, it's 24-hour darkness, and in the summer, it's 24 hours of daylight. That can be challenging on your circadian rhythm. When you never see the sun all day, you don't know when it's daytime or nighttime, your body is all confused when to sleep and when not to sleep, and that is hard on the body. In the summer, when it's 24 hours of daylight, it can be hard to sleep because your body is always seeing the sun. It doesn't want to go to sleep because it doesn't see a sunset. So a lot of places that we go, we had blackout curtains. And for those places that we didn't, I actually packed a black garbage bag with me that I could put over windows. And that's the year in the Arctic. Once the middle of September hits, the temperatures start to drop, the oceans freeze, and we start another journey in the Great White North. So what's it like to fly up there? Well, it's not without its many challenges. First, you must be dressed to survive. If you ever crash in the Arctic, you will most likely survive because it's flat, covered in deep snow, and gives you plenty of space to make an emergency landing. Surviving at minus 30 degrees Celsius is another story. Search and rescue is far away and it's going to take them time to find you, especially if the weather is poor, because you're a white airplane in the middle of white. So what you wear can literally make the difference between life and death. I wore long johns, insulated cargo pants, Costco $20. Then I wore a thermal layer, a t-shirt, and a sweater. On my feet I wore merino wool socks and minus 100 degrees Celsius insulated boots. Then I took gloves and the most valuable piece of clothing that I owned, my goose down parka. I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding goose down parkas, especially people wearing them in big cities when they don't really need to, but in the Arctic, the goose down is the warmest material, and these jackets are a must to survive. Once we show up to the aircraft, we would begin getting the airplane ready. The ground guys would usually have a Herman Nelson already heating up the inside of the airplane, which is essentially a giant portable heater that pumps out a lot of heat. We would then do the walk around, which is where you would be happy wearing all those layers, do the checklists, load up the passengers, and off we go. Very rarely do we have to de-ice in the Arctic. Because it's so cold, the snow is dry and doesn't actually stick to anything. You can just simply brush it off with a broom, so that's a little bonus. The next challenge we were always dealing with is weather. A change in wind speed or direction or a faster moving weather system could develop in hours. So we always had to be vigilant by checking the weather and making quick decisions whether to continue to our destination or go to our alternate. Communities in the Arctic are hours apart, and we only carry so much fuel, and there's nowhere to make a pit stop if we get into trouble. So making frequent fuel checks was very important. To add to our challenges, sometimes our alternate even went below minima, which put us in a very challenging position to continue to our alternate and hope the weather improves by the time we get there, to return to our departure airport if we had the fuel, which sometimes we didn't, or come up with a very quick backup plan last minute and try to find a new airport. Because of this, our days were quite long, usually 10 to 12 hours, because the communities are that far apart. Sometimes the weather turned bad and we would have to go to our alternate with around 5 to 7 hours of flying. The company I worked for had 6-day pairings, so we would fly around Baffin Island for 6 days. On the first day we would do 2 or 3 hops on the west side of Baffin Island, spend the night in Pond Inlet. On day 2 we would go back down the west coast or the east coast. On day 3 we would either fly around Iqaluit or start to make our way up to Pond Inlet again. All the airspace in the Arctic is uncontrolled except Yellowknife and Iqaluit. The runways are simple gravel strips with very simple terminal buildings. Oh, and by the way, there's no airport security in the northern communities. The challenges of landing on a gravel strip in the winter is that we had to make sure that someone plowed the runway. It could have snowed overnight, or the wind could blow snow onto the runway, creating windrows, and because it's all white, we don't have very good depth perception. The challenges in the summer was that the airport was muddy, either from the melting snow or rain, and we would have to do a flyby to make sure there was no standing water before we made the landing. Also, because it's windy, sometimes we would get a whiteout effect, where if the wind picks up the snow and there's an overcast layer, it would be very difficult to see the horizon and tell the difference between the ground and the sky. To add to those challenges, almost all approaches in the Arctic are NDB approaches, which aren't as precise as at big airports, resulting in higher minima, which is where we make the decision to land or go around. So often, we would not even see the runway and have to do a go around and fly to our alternate. And that was the constant battle, making sure that we always had options by keeping a close eye on the weather and our fuel and being ready to make quick decisions to prevent us from getting into trouble. Now let me tell you a few stories. How does a local in Iqaluit know you're a tourist? When you show up at the bar and ask what's on tap. I didn't get it at first either until they told me they only have aluminum cans because everything is flown up into the Arctic by airplanes, so the heavier it is, the more it costs. So aluminum cans are lighter than a keg, and that goes for everything from food to diapers to car parts. Speaking of cars, if you wanted to make a large purchase like that, you can't simply go to the dealership because there are none. You have to get it shipped by boat, and that can only happen once a year in the summer when the oceans open up. The same thing happens for fuel. A barge comes up once a year in the summer months and refills all the communities with gas, and that has to last them for the whole year. So in the springtime, this batch would have a challenging time planning our fuel because the smaller communities would be close to running out of fuel, so we would end up ferrying a lot of fuel from big cities like Yellowknife and Iqaluit just so we wouldn't have to fill up in the smaller towns. Let me tell you about my very first overnight in Pawn Inlet. I was super excited because that's the furthest north I've been in my whole life, and it's the very northern tip of Baffin Island. We finished the day early with lots of sunshine to spare, so we went exploring the town. Luckily for us, a giant iceberg was frozen in the ocean right outside town. It was the size of a building, and it was the most unique experience in my life. On the way back into town, we noticed that all the signs were in Iqaluit, which is the main language of Nunavut. It was great to see how they're trying to preserve their language and culture. Then I noticed something strange on the side of the road. At first it looked like a piece of wood, but upon further inspection I realized that it was a bone. It looked like a giant dinosaur bone. At first I wasn't sure whether to believe that or not. Where would such a large bone come from? Then we figured it out. It was a rib bone, specifically a rib bone from a bowhead whale. Every year, one community is drawn to be able to hunt for a whale, which is then shared across the whole community for food for the upcoming winter. The hunt is carried out traditionally with small boats and harpoons, just like they did in the old days. In the short time that I was flying in the Arctic, I experienced a lot of amazing and unique things. It was an opportunity that not many pilots will ever get in their career, and I appreciated every minute of it. Unfortunately, my time was cut short when the Alberta recession started in 2014 and many companies were laying off pilots, including myself. But the experience I gained was invaluable. From how to make fast and accurate decisions, to solving problems under extreme circumstances, and flying an airplane in one of the most inhospitable places on planet Earth. These things cannot be taught in a simulator. That's why Canada produces some of the best pilots in the world, because these are our stepping stones, the hurdles we have to overcome in order to build our hours and experience before moving on to the airlines. In Canada, it's very rare to go from a flight school to a jet, like they do in Europe and many other countries. If you are interested in flying in the Arctic, hopefully this video gave you an idea of what to expect and whether this is something you might be interested in. If you're not and you just want to go for a visit, I highly recommend it. It will be an adventure you will never forget. So thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next episode.